The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Beverly Hills, usually golden and pristine, now looked like a city mourning something. Maybe it was mourning her. Inside the Hale residence, a towering white stone mansion with a black iron gate, the silence was broken only by the soft hum of a dishwasher and the occasional thunder rumbling outside. But upstairs, behind a locked bedroom door, it wasn't silence. It was pain. Emily Carter, 6 months pregnant, lay crumpled on the marble floor, her silk nightgown, once ivory, now stained with blood. One arm tucked under her belly as if trying to protect the baby, the other sprawled out toward the door. Her lips parted, but no sound came out anymore. The last scream had already been choked by fear and by his hand. Marcus Hale, her husband, stood over her, shirtless, breathing hard, his knuckles red, one of them slightly cracked and bleeding. He wasn't shouting anymore. That part was done. Now came the silence. The moment he always called her dramatic, as if her pain was a performance. But tonight was different. Downstairs, Maria, their longtime housekeeper, stood frozen behind the kitchen counter. She had heard it all. The thud, the crash, the scream, the silence. Her hands trembled around the sponge she was holding. She wanted to run upstairs to help, but she also knew Marcus's threats were not empty. Last time, he made sure she understood that any disobedience would cost her more than her job. And yet, something was wrong. Very wrong. An hour later, Marcus left in his Mercedes-AMG, tires screeching in the rain, telling Maria not to go upstairs. She needs space, he said. But when the door slammed and the engine disappeared into the distance, Maria made a choice that would change everything. She crept upstairs, heart pounding, whispering prayers in Spanish. And there she found Emily, barely breathing, skin cold, pulse faint. Her face was swollen, lips split, her belly frighteningly still. Maria's scream pierced the mansion. At Cedar Sinai emergency room, doctors moved fast. Oxygen, IV, monitors. The baby's heartbeat, faint, but there. Emily, unconscious, not dead, but close. That's when a nurse, flipping through the emergency contact list on Emily's phone, dialed the first number listed. Dad, Richard Carter. It was 11:37 p.m. Richard Carter, a retired police captain in Sacramento, hadn't spoken to his daughter in 3 years, not since she married Marcus against his wishes. But when the call came, his voice didn't waver. Sir, your daughter is critical. You need to come now. There was a long pause. Then came the sound of a chair scraping back, keys rattling, and a voice that had once brought down crime lords whispering something cold and steady. Text me the hospital address. I'm on my way. And whoever did this, God help them. Because Emily's father wasn't just any man. He was a man who'd buried guilt, buried love, and now he was about to unbury justice. He had no idea who he just put in a coma. Emily Carter wasn't always a woman found bleeding on a marble floor in a Beverly Hills mansion. Once, she had been light. Not the kind that came from chandeliers or camera flashes, but the kind that lit up rooms simply by being in them. Born and raised in Sacramento, she was the daughter of a strict but loving police captain and a mother who never let her walk out the door without sunscreen and a sense of pride. She was smart, earned a scholarship to UCLA, studied interior architecture, fell in love with textures, light, the way a room could heal a broken soul. She had dreams. She wanted to open a boutique design firm, help everyday people create beautiful, functional spaces they could actually live in. Nothing extravagant, just meaningful. But dreams like that don't always survive the gravitational pull of wealth. Emily met Marcus Hale during a conference at the Beverly Hilton. He was older, charismatic, magnetic in the way powerful men often are, especially when they choose you, just you, in a room full of people. He said she had vision. He said he admired how she saw beauty in broken things. He told her she was the kind of woman who could change a man's life. She believed him. 6 months later, she had a Cartier ring on her finger and was walking down an aisle made of crystal and orchids flown in from Thailand. Her mother wept. Her father did not attend. Be careful what you fall in love with, he had said. A man like Marcus doesn't fall in love, he acquires. But Emily was in love, with the promise of partnership, the illusion of support, the idea that someone that powerful saw her as an equal. That illusion didn't crack all at once. It peeled, slowly. First, it was the decisions he corrected for her in front of clients. Then the friends she stopped hearing from. The email account he asked to sync for security. The occasional bruises she learned to explain away, to herself more than anyone. By the time she realized she was more of a possession than a partner, she was already pregnant. And somehow that made her hold on even tighter. Maybe, she thought, the baby would change things. Maybe the man she married still existed somewhere underneath the cruelty. But reality doesn't bend for hope. Emily had no job, no savings. Her name wasn't on the mansion's deed or the business. Even the car she drove was leased under Marcus's assistant's name. He made sure of it. But what Marcus didn't understand, what most men like him never understand, is that women like Emily survive not because they're weak, but because they've learned to carry their pain silently until the moment it becomes a weapon. The night she was beaten into a coma, she had already started packing a bag. It was tucked behind the nursery door, half full, hidden under baby clothes and a folder labeled Plan B. Inside was a flash drive, emails, photos, a journal, everything she had quietly collected in case the time ever came. And it had. She just didn't know that the call to her father would come first. That she would never finish that final step toward freedom on her own. But now, with her body fighting in silence and her baby clinging to life inside her, Emily's story was no longer hers alone. It was her father's. And he wasn't going to let the light she once carried go out without a war. The Hale Mansion was the kind of place that whispered power. Perched atop Benedict Canyon, its stone facade gleamed white even under the rain, like a monument too proud to decay. It was 3 stories of marble, glass, and secrets. The kind of house that hosted silent dinners and louder arguments, where every room was curated for magazine spreads, not for comfort. Inside, the air was cold, always cold, even with central heating. Emily had once tried to warm it up with woven throws and scented candles, little touches of humanity. But Marcus hated clutter. He preferred sleek lines, neutral tones, minimalist elegance, as he called it. In truth, he liked to erase things, especially anything that reminded him he shared the space with someone else. The nursery had been her sanctuary. Painted a soft sage green with hand-drawn animal sketches on the walls. It was the only room Marcus never entered. He claimed it was because he trusted her taste. But Emily knew the truth. He didn't want to face the baby growing inside her. The baby that might steal the spotlight, dilute his control, or worse, make him feel something. When the paramedics arrived, they were met not with chaos, but eerie order. Maria had opened the gates, her apron soaked from the rain, face pale with fear. She didn't speak. She simply led them through the grand foyer, past the Mont Blanc pen still resting beside Marcus's closed laptop, past the oversized Dior armchair Emily used to sit in when she read alone, past the rows of untouched crystal glasses lining the bar cart. Upstairs, Emily lay still. No more cries. No more whispers. Just the quiet ticking of a Tiffany wall clock as 2 EMTs lifted her onto the gurney. Her nightgown clung to her skin, soaked in blood and stormwater. One of them whispered, "Jesus Christ," when they saw the bruises. But they kept moving. Time was life now. As the ambulance sped down Sunset Boulevard, the city glittered in the distance, unaware that a woman was dying inside a $1 million body. They arrived at Cedars-Sinai, a place where LA's elite go when their bodies betray them. The lobby smelled of citrus disinfectant and private insurance. No screaming, no chaos, just calm urgency. Nurses moved with efficiency born from seeing too much. 29, female, unconscious, blunt force trauma, the EMT shouted. Pregnant, approximately 24 to 26 weeks. She was wheeled past floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Los Angeles skyline, past wealthy donors, names engraved in gold on the walls. But Emily didn't see any of it. She was somewhere deeper now. Meanwhile, in Sacramento, Richard Carter stared at the text on his phone. Cedars-Sinai, critical condition, possible domestic assault, unconscious, fetal heart detected. He'd seen every kind of horror in his career, homicides, overdoses, things he never talked about. But nothing had ever made his hands shake like this. He didn't pack a bag. He just grabbed his keys, his old badge, long retired, and a weathered manila folder he hadn't touched in years. Inside were clippings, photos, notes, everything he'd gathered on Marcus Hale when his instincts first rang alarm bells. He had let Emily walk away from him. Let her choose that man. But now, she was broken inside a hospital room that smelled like bleach and regret. And Richard Carter was already on the road. Because if the mansion was Marcus's kingdom, Then the hospital was the battleground, and Richard had just declared war. Marcus Hale was not a man who yelled in public. He didn't need to. He had the kind of face that made people lean in, perfectly symmetrical, lightly tanned, sculpted jawline that photographs loved. His hair was always in place, his suits always tailored to whisper custom. When he walked into a room, people quieted, not out of fear but intrigue. And he used that silence like a scalpel. Born in Greenwich, Connecticut, to old money and older secrets, Marcus had grown up knowing the world bent for people like him. His family name was stitched into buildings at Harvard, whispered at country clubs, and printed on endowment plaques. But Marcus wanted more than legacy. He wanted control. By the time he was 32, he had built Hale Properties, a sleek luxury real estate firm that sold dreams and zip codes most people only saw on screen. His name was synonymous with power listings in Manhattan, Malibu, Aspen. But beneath the Forbes profiles and glossy spreads in Architectural Digest, there was a man who didn't just want to be admired. He wanted to be obeyed. Marcus didn't hit Emily at first. No abuser ever does. At first, it was compliments laced with correction. "I love that you're so passionate. Just try not to get emotional during meetings, okay?" Then it was control masked as care. "Let me handle the accounts. You focus on your creativity." Then the first push. Accidental, of course. He apologized with Tiffany earrings. The second time, it was a slap. No gifts afterward, just silence. And a week later, a gaslit argument about how you always provoke things when you don't listen. By then, Emily had learned not to cry. Not because she wasn't in pain, but because Marcus hated tears. He called them manipulative, childish. What he loved was control. He controlled the thermostat, the music in the house, the calendar. He controlled what Emily wore to events, preferring classic cuts and muted tones. "No reds. Red's a power move," he once said. "That's my color." He curated their social media like a brand strategist. Pictures of sunsets in Maui, charity galas in Manhattan, and her, smiling, always smiling. To the outside world, they were the power couple. But behind closed doors, he kept her small. And when Emily got pregnant, he didn't soften. He got colder. The baby, he said, would mess up their dynamic. When she started planning the nursery, he didn't even glance at the design board she made on her iPad. "The kid will be raised by a nanny anyway. Don't get too attached." That night, he came home late, smelling like whiskey and Dior Sauvage. Angry at a missed business deal. Emily had made soup. He didn't eat it. When she asked why, he threw the bowl. The ceramic shattered near her feet. No apology came. Just his usual line, "Stop acting like a victim. You knew what you signed up for." The night he beat her into a coma, Marcus didn't snap. He calculated. She had challenged him in front of his associate during a video call. Embarrassed him. After the meeting ended, he poured himself Macallan 25. Took off his cufflinks, rolled up his sleeves, then went upstairs. What he didn't know was that Emily had already started preparing to leave him. She had backup copies of everything. She'd spoken to a lawyer in secret. She had proof. And if Marcus found out, he would do what all dangerous men do when they feel their empire slipping. He would destroy what he couldn't control. The official report from Cedars-Sinai was short, clinical, and deliberately vague. Emily Hale, 29, admitted at 12:14 a.m. in critical condition. Blunt force trauma, 6 months pregnant. Patient currently comatose. Vital signs fluctuating. Fetal heart rate weak but present. Under observation. What it didn't say, what it couldn't say, was the part that mattered most. Someone had done this to her. And someone would pay. Within 12 hours, whispers turned to questions. Maria, the housekeeper, had stayed silent for years. But that night, as Emily's blood was being scrubbed from the bathroom floor by a private cleaning crew Marcus hired on speed dial, she stood on the sidewalk outside the Hale estate and dialed a number she hadn't called in 10 years. Richard Carter. Her voice cracked as she told him everything. The bruises, the screams, the night Marcus broke a vase and blamed her, the threats, and the look in his eyes before he left the house that night. A look she said she'd seen once before when Marcus's dog had killed a squirrel and wagged its tail after. Richard listened in silence, then hung up and called a friend still working in LAPD homicide. By the next morning, something had shifted. Marcus Hale stood outside the hospital in a Tom Ford overcoat, speaking to reporters with perfect posture and grave concern. His voice choked on cue. His wedding ring gleamed in the weak sun. His statement was short. My wife and I have had a complicated but deeply loving relationship. This has been a terrible accident. I ask that you respect our privacy while she and our unborn child fight for their lives. Accident. It was the word that started the fire, because the doctors didn't call it that. Neither did the nurses. And the bruising patterns on her wrists, her ribs, her neck didn't scream accident. They screamed rage. But Marcus had money, and money buys silence, or tries to. His legal team filed an emergency injunction to block all access to Emily's medical records. Her name was scrubbed from media updates. Security was posted outside her room. Anyone not approved by Marcus was denied entry, including Richard. But Richard Carter wasn't the kind of man you block with security guards. He didn't yell. He didn't flash his old badge. He just waited, quietly, methodically, pulling strings. Old favors, names from back in the day. A nurse who still remembered the time he talked down a hostage situation without drawing his gun. Soon, Richard was inside. And what he saw broke something in him. Emily's face was barely recognizable. Tubes. Monitors. The rhythmic beeping of a machine breathing for her. Her hand, limp on the sheet, still bore the faint impression of Marcus's signet ring. She didn't fall, Richard whispered. You don't fall like this. And from that moment, he stopped being a father in grief. He became a man with a mission. Marcus could hide behind PR teams, luxury lawyers, and gated mansions all he wanted. But now the truth had weight. And Emily, though unconscious, had allies. Maria was ready to testify. A forensic nurse had already flagged the injuries as non-accidental trauma. LAPD was watching, because Marcus Hale's kingdom was built on image. But now his image had a crack, and the whole world was starting to look inside. Hospitals have a sound that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. It's not loud, it's not quiet. It's a constant blend of soft footsteps, hushed voices, distant beeping, and the subtle hum of machines keeping people alive, or letting them go. Richard Carter sat alone in the family waiting room on the 5th floor of Cedars-Sinai. The walls were painted in calming pastels. A framed print of a sunrise hung crooked above the couch. But nothing about the room felt peaceful. It was a place where hope slowly eroded. He had been there for 20 hours. He hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, just stared at the swinging double doors, praying they would open with good news. But good news doesn't come easy when your daughter is in a coma. A nurse had offered him a blanket. Another had brought him Starbucks coffee in a paper cup. He didn't touch it. He just kept going over the last conversation they'd had 3 years ago on her wedding day. I know you think you're doing the right thing, Richard had said, but love isn't supposed to make you afraid to speak. And she'd smiled, tired, defiant. I'm not afraid. He understands me in ways you never did. That line, that sentence. It had looped in his head so many times it no longer sounded like her voice. It just echoed. Now she lay behind glass, still and broken, her hands unmoving, her eyes closed. Monitors spoke for her. Machines breathed for her. A child, his grandchild, hung in the balance. He stood once, walked to her door, and just looked at her. I'm here, Em, he whispered, placing his hand on the glass. I should have come sooner. I should have fought harder. The guilt pressed down like steel. He'd been a cop for 30 years, seen patterns, read people. He knew Marcus was wrong for her from day one, but instead of staying close, he'd pulled away. Let her fall alone. That silence, his silence, had almost killed her. Back in the waiting room, he finally opened his old manila folder. Inside, Marcus's financial records, articles, photos. One of them, a candid shot from a charity gala, showed Marcus with his hand tightly gripping Emily's arm. Her smile was there, but the fear in her eyes was something only a father would notice. He ran his finger across the photo. No more hiding, he murmured. No more pretending this didn't happen. Across town, Marcus was already working damage control. He had hired a crisis PR firm, sent gift baskets to the hospital, and made a donation in Emily's name. To the press, he was a loving, devastated husband. To Richard, he was a man playing chess with real lives. As night fell, the world outside the hospital kept moving. Traffic flowed, restaurants filled, but inside that room, time had stopped. Emily remained motionless, a mother in waiting, a daughter silenced by brutality. And somewhere inside her, if there was still a place untouched by pain, was the memory of her father's hand on her shoulder when she was 5, whispering, "No one will ever hurt you. Not on my watch. Now that watch had returned. Late. But not too late. And Richard Carter had nothing left to lose, except the last person he loved. 3 days after Emily slipped into a coma, something changed. Richard Carter was in the hospital cafeteria, poking at a cold sandwich, when a woman in her early 50s approached. Her eyes were tired but kind, and she wore scrubs. A nurse. He didn't recognize her. "You're Emily's father, right?" she asked, voice low. He nodded. She glanced around, then pulled out a sealed plastic bag from her coat pocket. Inside, a cracked iPhone, blood on the screen. The wallpaper still visible, Emily holding up a tiny baby onesie in front of a mirror, smiling. "I found it behind the toilet in her room," the nurse whispered. "The police missed it. They didn't do a full sweep. Marcus's lawyers made sure of that." Richard's heart stopped. "Did you open it?" "I didn't have to," she said, "but I saw something flash on the screen before it died. A voice recording app. The last file said, January 14th, bedroom. That was the night she was attacked." Richard took the phone with trembling hands. The screen was almost blacked out, but he could see just enough. She had tried to leave evidence. Even as Marcus broke her body, Emily had been fighting to leave a trace. Back upstairs, he plugged the phone into a charger. Nothing. Dead. He needed help. That's when he remembered someone from his past. Ryan Cho, ex-cybercrimes detective, now working freelance in Silicon Beach doing security consulting for tech startups. He hadn't spoken to Ryan in a decade, but the man owed him a favor. A big one. By sunset, Richard was in a nondescript office above a smoothie bar in Venice, watching Ryan work on Emily's phone. The moment the screen lit up, Richard leaned in. Ryan tapped the recorder app. One file. 4 minutes 26 seconds. Timestamp 9:12 p.m., an hour before Emily was found. He hit play. At first just silence, then footsteps. A door slamming. Marcus's voice, sharp, cutting. "You think you can walk away from me?" Then Emily, calm, trembling but defiant. "I have everything backed up, Marcus, if anything happens to me." A crash, a scream. Then nothing but brutal sounds. The impact, the breathing, the violence. Then silence again. Richard couldn't breathe. Ryan looked at him, pale. "You take this to the cops and it's over. This isn't just abuse, this is attempted murder." But Richard shook his head. Not yet. He didn't want Marcus to know what they had, not until it mattered most. He tucked the phone away and thanked Ryan. Then another surprise. Maria, the housekeeper, showed up outside the hospital the next morning. In her hand, a small silver chain with a micro camera attached. She'd placed it months ago in a decorative vase in the upstairs hallway. It had motion detection. "I was afraid," she admitted, "but I couldn't live with myself if she died and I did nothing." Richard reviewed the files. It wasn't just audio now. They had video. Marcus's face, his actions, the moment of impact, the cold retreat as he left her there. The story had changed. Emily was no longer just a woman in a coma. She was a witness. She was a whistleblower. And her silence was about to become the loudest voice in Los Angeles. The twist was simple. Emily had already started saving herself. Richard just had to finish what she started. By the 5th day, Richard Carter stopped being a grieving father. He became a man with a plan. The transformation didn't come with a dramatic speech or a slammed fist. It came quietly, like most powerful shifts do. Sitting beside Emily's hospital bed, watching her chest rise and fall beneath the ventilator, he whispered, "You did your part, baby girl. Now I'll do mine." Emily was still unconscious, but something in the room had changed. There was a tension in the air now. Not just grief, but purpose. Richard stood, straightened his jacket, and left the hospital for the first time in days. He went home, not to sleep, but to prepare. His old garage, once filled with rusting tools and forgotten fishing gear, became a war room. The walls were lined with printed photos, timelines, names, dates. He hung stills from the hidden camera footage, printed transcripts from Emily's recording, screenshots from text messages Maria had secretly taken over the years. Everything was organized because he knew Marcus. Marcus Hale didn't crumble from confrontation. He thrived in it. What he couldn't survive was exposure. Carefully timed, undeniable, and public exposure. This wasn't about getting revenge in the shadows. This had to be a spotlight execution, legal, public, undeniable. Richard contacted a retired prosecutor named Denise Fowler, one of the few people he trusted. She'd once prosecuted a mayor's son for domestic violence and won. When she saw the footage, her response was chilling. This is enough to bury him. But she warned him, if you go public, he'll hit back. Hard. He'll drag Emily through the mud. Say she was unstable, manipulative, even suicidal. Richard nodded. Then we get ahead of him. That night, while Marcus attended a fundraiser in Manhattan, posting polished photos beside a fake sympathetic caption about healing and hope, Richard was in a dimly lit boardroom downtown. Across from him sat a media consultant, formerly with a top cable news channel. Young, sharp, and known for spinning high-profile cases. Richard showed him everything. The consultant leaned back, eyes wide. This isn't just a domestic case, he said. This is a cultural grenade, a millionaire, a pregnant wife, a cover-up, the kind of story that explodes across every screen. Richard didn't blink. I want him destroyed. Not in secret. I want every woman who's ever been silenced to see this and remember her power. Meanwhile, back in the hospital, Emily's vital signs were stabilizing. Her brain activity, still faint, had begun showing more consistent patterns. Doctors were cautious, but hopeful. She's fighting, the nurse told Richard over the phone. We've seen worse come back. And deep inside her coma, somewhere beyond memory or time, Emily was dreaming. Not of Marcus, not of the night she was broken, but of a tiny nursery painted in sage green, of soft light filtering through white curtains, of a baby's cry and her voice saying, I've got you. You're safe now. Even in silence, her strength was building, because healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like stillness, like a storm gathering in the sky. And this storm, this quiet, calculated, righteous storm, was about to strike. It started with a leak. A 32-second video clip uploaded anonymously at 7:03 a.m. to a small women's rights forum on Reddit. The footage was grainy, time-stamped, and unmistakably real. It showed Marcus Hale, shirtless, furious, shoving his pregnant wife to the floor. The sound of her cry echoed, then cut. The video ended before impact. Within an hour, it had been shared 40,000 times. By noon, Have Justice for Emily was trending across Twitter, TikTok, and every cable network in America. At 1:45 p.m., CNN broke the story. At 2, NBC confirmed it was authentic. By 3:15, the LAPD had reopened the case. And by sunset, Marcus Hale's face, once the symbol of California's success, was plastered across every screen in the country. The world finally saw the man behind the mask. Richard Carter watched the chaos unfold from his living room. The blinds were closed, his phone on silent. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just exhaled. A sound halfway between relief and mourning. Denise Fowler, the former prosecutor, called. You understand what you've started, right? There's no going back now. I don't want to go back, Richard said quietly. I just want him to feel what she felt, helpless. But Marcus wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat, at least not quietly. By that evening, his PR team was in overdrive. Statements were released, denials issued. His lawyers claimed the footage was doctored. He accused vindictive individuals of conspiring against him for financial gain. Then came the televised press conference. Marcus stood behind a podium outside his Beverly Hills mansion, reporters shouting questions. He looked immaculate in a gray suit, his tone perfectly calibrated. I have never harmed my wife. These are tragic, manipulated lies designed to destroy my family. My heart is with Emily as she recovers. But as he spoke, a second video dropped. This one, longer, clearer. Emily's voice trembling, Marcus yelling, then the sound of violence, followed by silence. It was undeniable. The crowd turned on him instantly. Reporters shouted over one another. The polished mask slipped from his face for just a second. A flicker of rage caught live on camera. And that was all it took. By midnight, his sponsors pulled out. His board forced him to resign from Hale Properties. His penthouse was surrounded by paparazzi. His friends, gone. His phone, exploding with legal summons. The kingdom had fallen. Back at the hospital, Richard sat beside Emily, holding her hand as the TV played softly in the corner. Her story was everywhere now, no longer hidden behind glass and gated walls. She had become a symbol. The quiet, faceless women across the world now had a name to rally behind. And as the evening news replayed Marcus's downfall, Richard felt her fingers twitch, just slightly. It was small, barely perceptible, but real. Emily, he whispered. A pause. Then another movement. Her hand squeezed his eyes filled with tears. She's coming back, the nurse whispered. She's fighting. Richard nodded, voice breaking. She's not done yet. Outside, rain fell over Los Angeles, washing the city clean. Inside, the monitors beeped steady and strong. Marcus Hale's empire was ashes. Emily Carter's voice, though not yet spoken, was finally heard. And the world would never forget the name of the woman he tried to silence. The first word Emily whispered when she woke up wasn't Marcus. It wasn't even Dad. It was simply, alive? Richard Carter nodded through tears he didn't bother hiding. Yeah, baby, you are. It had been 12 days. 12 days since the night Marcus Hale tried to silence her forever. 12 days of ventilators, IVs, heart monitors, and hope. And now, the light in her eyes, though faint, was back. The doctors called it a miracle. But Richard knew better. It wasn't just medicine that brought her back. It was unfinished business. Emily spent the next week in recovery. She was weak. Her speech came slowly. Her body ached in places she didn't even recognize. But her mind, sharp as ever. And as she healed, she began to remember everything. Every insult, every bruise, every night she pretended not to hear her own sobs through the walls. She asked Richard for her phone. He handed it to her, now repaired and powered on. The first thing she did? Opened the voice memo app. She listened to the recording. Then she cried, not for herself, but for every woman who didn't live to tell their story. That same day, she gave a sworn statement to the police. Marcus Hale was formally charged with attempted murder, aggravated battery, and spousal abuse. With video and audio evidence in hand, the case moved quickly. No plea deal, no mercy. The courtroom was packed on the first day of trial. Emily walked in slowly, dressed in a simple navy suit, her father at her side. No glam squad, no makeup artists, just a woman who refused to be invisible anymore. She took the stand. And for the first time, the world heard her voice. My name is Emily Carter, she said, and I am not ashamed of what happened to me, but he should be. Gasps echoed across the room. She detailed the abuse, calmly, clearly. She spoke of the control, the manipulation, the nights she hid bruises under long sleeves and makeup. She talked about the baby, the little girl she almost never got to meet. She's alive because I fought, and now I'm fighting for her future. Marcus didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes on the table. The jury took less than 4 hours to return a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Marcus Hale, once a billionaire darling of Beverly Hills, was sentenced to 28 years in prison without parole. That night, Emily held her daughter for the first time. They named her Grace, because that's what it took to survive. In the months that followed, Emily disappeared from the spotlight. No interviews, no book deals, no talk shows. She moved into a small home near Sacramento, started a design consultancy from her laptop, and raised her daughter in peace. But the movement she sparked didn't fade. Across social media, women began to share their stories with the hashtag #EmilySurvived. Her voice had become a beacon. One morning, sitting on her porch with a coffee in hand and Grace asleep on her chest, she scrolled through messages from strangers, survivors, fighters, healers. And she smiled. Not the kind of smile she wore in Marcus's Instagram photos. This one was real, because now she knew. Silence is not strength. Speaking is. And survival is not the end. It's the beginning. Healing isn't a headline. It doesn't go viral. It happens in silence, long after the courtroom cameras have turned away. For Emily Carter, healing began in small moments. Standing up without assistance, brushing her daughter's hair without wincing, hearing her name without flinching. Recovery wasn't a grand return. It was relearning how to breathe in a world that once tried to choke her. The media had moved on. Another scandal, another trending hashtag. But for Emily, the echoes of the past still lingered in the hallways of her modest new home in Sacramento. The mornings were hardest. She'd wake up gasping from dreams she didn't talk about. Some nights she'd still hear Marcus's voice, not yelling, but whispering, as he often did before the worst moments. Those memories didn't fade, but she learned to live beside them, like scars, there, but no longer bleeding. Her daughter Grace was thriving. At 7 months, she had Marcus's jaw, but Emily's eyes. Big, observant, and gentle. She was the reason Emily didn't fall apart, the reason she got out of bed, the reason she opened the curtains and let the light in, even when it hurt. Richard visited every day. Sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to sit on the porch and read while Grace napped. He didn't ask questions, didn't push, he just stayed. You saved me, Emily told him once, her voice cracking. No, he said, his eyes soft, you saved yourself. I just reminded you who you were." They didn't talk much about Marcus anymore, but his shadow still tried to crawl in through the cracks. There were threats, letters from prison, intercepted and sealed, attempts from his lawyers to appeal, anonymous hate online accusing her of ruining a good man's life. But for every hateful message, there were 100 more from women around the world. Survivors, mothers, daughters, strangers who said, "You gave me courage." She never responded. She didn't need to. She wasn't trying to be a symbol. She was just trying to be okay. On Grace's first birthday, Emily hosted a small gathering. Just a few people. Richard, Maria the housekeeper, now retired and living in a guest house nearby, and Denise Fowler, the woman who helped prosecute Marcus. They didn't wear black. They didn't mention what had been lost. They celebrated what had survived. Emily stood with Grace in her arms, the soft hum of laughter filling the air. There were balloons, cupcakes, a quiet warmth in the backyard. Nothing fancy, just safe. And that's what she'd been building. Safety. Not perfection, not revenge, not fame, just a life where no one yelled, no one lied, no one hit. Later that night, after everyone had gone and Grace was asleep, Emily sat on the porch alone. The stars were out, the wind soft. Her laptop rested beside her, screen open to her design portfolio. She was taking on new clients, slowly. Room by room, she helped people make spaces that healed. Because she knew now, sometimes the only way to reclaim yourself is to build something new from the ruins. Marcus Hale used to own rooms without saying a word. Now he couldn't speak without permission. Cell Block D at San Quentin wasn't built for men like Marcus. Wealthy, educated, once untouchable. But it didn't care. The concrete didn't flinch at net worth. The steel bars didn't bow to real estate portfolios. In here, all that mattered was the charge sheet. And Marcus Hale's charge sheet read like a list of sins finally dragged into daylight. He spent 23 hours a day in a 6-by-9-foot cell. The windows were barred, the mattress thin. His only luxury, silence, until it turned on him. He had expected support, expected old allies to call, expected legal maneuvering to save him. Instead, his name became a brand of disgrace. Investors fled. His board scrubbed his image from the company's site. High-profile friends who once toasted champagne at his rooftop parties now claimed they'd never known the real Marcus. His fall wasn't just steep, it was surgical. Once a symbol of dominance, Marcus became a warning, a living reminder that power built on fear doesn't last. But the true echo of his actions didn't ring in the prison halls. It rang in homes, shelters, and courtrooms across the country. In the months following the trial, domestic abuse hotlines reported a 38% increase in calls. Survivors referenced Emily's case by name. Legislators in California introduced the Emily Act, streamlining evidence admission for abuse victims who documented their trauma digitally. Voice memos, hidden cameras, text backups. The bill passed with bipartisan support. News anchors stopped calling her the wife of Marcus Hale. She had her own name now, Emily Carter. A woman who once couldn't speak above a whisper was now a name that made senators stand when mentioned. But the echoes didn't stop there. A best-selling author dedicated her memoir to every woman who fought in silence, and to Emily Carter, who reminded us all how loud silence can be. A podcast series titled Her Proof featured her case in a 5-part deep dive that reached millions. Even Grace, still a toddler, was unknowingly growing up in a world slightly safer because her mother refused to stay broken. Back in prison, Marcus watched it all unfold from a static-filled TV in the common area. He would never say it out loud, but what tormented him most wasn't the sentence. It wasn't the food, the noise, or even the loss of power. It was that Emily had won, not just in court, but in the hearts of people, in the cultural consciousness, in the slow, undeniable shift of what women were allowed to survive and speak of. She had stolen the one thing he'd always valued most, legacy, and replaced it with truth. One night, a fellow inmate asked him, "You really thought you could get away with it?" Marcus didn't answer. He simply stared at the wall, where someone had scratched 3 words into the paint. "She's still speaking." Grace was 3 years old the first time she asked, "Where's Daddy?" Emily froze. She had rehearsed the answer 100 times, written it out, torn it up, rewritten it again, but nothing could prepare her for the moment those innocent eyes searched hers, waiting. She knelt, met Grace eye to eye, and placed a gentle hand on her daughter's cheek. "Daddy made choices that hurt people. including Mommy. And now he's somewhere he can't hurt anyone anymore. Grace didn't cry. She just nodded the way children do when they don't understand the words, but feel the truth behind them. That night, after Grace fell asleep with her favorite plush rabbit tucked beneath her arm, Emily sat in the living room, lights dimmed, cradling a warm mug of chamomile tea. The house was quiet, wrapped in the kind of peace she used to think was only for other people. She had made it. Not without scars, not without grief, but she had made it. And now, she was raising a little girl in a world where the cycle had been broken. Emily didn't just protect Grace from Marcus, she taught her the language of strength. Every bedtime story was chosen carefully. Every school lunch packed with a note. You are brave, you are kind, you are never alone. She enrolled Grace in dance classes, not to make her perfect, but to give her rhythm. Enrolled her in story time at the local library, not for the books, but to teach her how to use her voice. Their life was simple, no trust funds, no limousines, just second-hand strollers, homemade meals, and a mother who whispered affirmations during morning car rides. Emily had returned to design work slowly. Word-of-mouth clients, quiet projects, a waiting list of women-owned small businesses who wanted someone who understood rebuilding, because that's what Emily did now. She didn't decorate homes. She helped survivors reclaim space. And Grace grew up in those rooms, watching, absorbing, becoming. On her 4th birthday, Grace stood on the porch, crown slightly askew, frosting on her nose. "Mommy," she said, "I want to be just like you." Emily smiled, blinking fast. "You already are." But legacy isn't built in birthday wishes. It's forged in daily choices. Emily kept journals, one for every year since the night everything changed. Letters to Grace she'd one day give her when she was old enough to understand not just what happened, but how they survived. "You come from fire," she wrote, "but you are not made of ash. You are the seed that grew from it." One afternoon, while reading on the couch, Emily looked up and saw Grace drawing on the floor. Crayons scattered. A sketch of their house, the sun smiling down on 2 stick figures holding hands. One had a heart on her dress, the other had a cape. "That's you," Grace said, pointing to the caped one. "You're my superhero." And in that moment, Emily didn't think about the past. Not the courtroom, not the pain, not even Marcus. Just this moment. Just this girl. Just this life she had rebuilt with her bare hands and her boundless will. Because some stories don't end in fire. Some end with a mother and daughter, standing in the light, rewriting the meaning of survival. It arrived on a Tuesday. A plain white envelope with no return address. Postmarked from Marin County. Emily hesitated before opening it, the weight in her chest tightening like a warning. She sliced the top carefully with a letter opener, hands steady but cold. Inside, just 1 page, handwritten. The slant of the letters, the arrogance in the loops, unmistakable. Marcus Hale. "Emily, they say I won't last long in here. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need to look you in the eye before I go. Please, just once." She read it 3 times, then folded it again and walked outside. The air was crisp. Grace was inside napping. For 20 full minutes she said nothing, did nothing, just stared into the trees, heart silent but screaming inside. It had been over 4 years since she last saw him, since that courtroom, where he kept his eyes low and his lies high, since the verdict that split her life in 2. Why now? Why reach out? What did he want? She didn't need answers, but part of her, buried deep beneath years of healing, wanted to see him. Not for closure, not for understanding, for power, for proof that she wasn't afraid anymore. She discussed it with Richard that night, his hands clenched when he read the letter. "You don't owe him a damn thing." "I know," Emily said, "but I owe me something." 2 weeks later, she entered San Quentin wearing a simple black blouse and jeans. No makeup, no jewelry, just clarity, just control. She walked through the metal detectors, signed the forms, waited. A guard led her down a narrow hall, the fluorescent lights buzzing above her. Then she saw him, behind the plexiglass. Thinner, older. The arrogance still flickered in his eyes, but dimmer now, like a fire losing oxygen. He picked up the phone on his side. She didn't touch hers. He gestured. Waited. Finally, she lifted the receiver. They stared at each other for 5 seconds before he spoke. "You look good?" She said nothing. "I don't expect you to believe me, but I think about her." Grace. Her hand didn't shake, her breath didn't hitch. "She's safe," Emily said flatly. "From you." He nodded, oddly slow. I know what I did. I know who I became. I was raised to win, to dominate, to never lose control. I thought was strength. Emily leaned forward, her voice sharp. You didn't lose control, Marcus. You took it because you thought you were entitled to it. He swallowed. I just needed to say I'm sorry. She stared at him. Long, hard. The silence between them was heavier than prison walls. Then she said, Your apology doesn't change what you did. But I came here to say one thing. He leaned in. I'm not scared of you anymore. Then she stood, without anger, without tears, without the need for anything more. She turned and walked away. And as the steel doors slammed shut behind her, Marcus Hale finally realized the greatest sentence he'd ever served wasn't the prison. It was her walking away unbroken. The invitation came in an email with no fanfare. Subject line, Keynote Opportunity, Women Who Rebuild Conference, Los Angeles. Emily read it twice before closing her laptop. She hadn't spoken publicly about her story. Not since the trial. Her healing had been private, sacred, safe. But something about the timing felt right. Grace was 5 now, strong, a little fierce, just like her mother. Richard encouraged her. You don't owe the world anything. But if you want to speak, speak. And she did. 2 months later, Emily Carter walked onto the stage at the Park Hyatt Ballroom in downtown LA. The room was packed. Over 600 women, survivors, leaders, daughters, mothers. Some held notebooks, some held tears, all waited. Emily wore navy, simple, elegant. Her hair pulled back. No makeup except for soft lipstick. Grace had picked the color. She stepped up to the mic, adjusted it once, took a breath. 5 years ago, she began, voice steady. I woke up in a hospital bed. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I didn't know if my daughter had survived. Silence. I was told I might never walk without pain again, that I was lucky to be alive. A pause. I don't feel lucky when I remember those nights. I don't feel lucky when I see the scars, but I do feel something else. She scanned the room. I feel strong. The room held its breath. I didn't come here to talk about what was done to me. You already know that story. It played out on your screens, in headlines, on social media. She paused again. I came here to talk about what I did after. The screens behind her lit up with images. Her small design business, a nursery she built for a single mom, a community center she helped refurbish. I learned how to live again, how to breathe without fear, how to raise a daughter who knows her voice matters. Applause began softly, then stopped because they didn't want to miss a word. I came to understand that surviving is only half the story. Thriving, that's the part no one prepares you for. No one talks about how hard it is to trust again, to sleep without fear, to dream. But I did it, and you can too. A woman in the front row wept openly. Emily's voice cracked, but she kept going. I want you to know that healing is messy. It's not a straight line. It's relapses. It's setbacks. It's looking at your reflection and seeing both the girl who was broken and the woman who rebuilt her. She stepped forward. And if you're still in that dark place, if no one's heard you yet, I hear you. I believe you. And more importantly, her eyes glistened. You're not alone. Silence again. Then a standing ovation. Hundreds of women on their feet, clapping through tears, holding each other. The sound was thunderous, but Emily didn't move. She stood at the mic, hands steady, heart wide open. Backstage, Grace ran into her arms. You sounded like a superhero. Emily held her tight. No, baby, she whispered. I sounded like me. That night, clips of the speech flooded social media. Millions watched, thousands wrote in, and one line became a new rallying cry. Surviving isn't the end. Thriving is the revolution. 6 months after her speech went viral, the first checks started arriving. Some were small, $25, $100. One came in with a note, I watched you speak. I was where you were. I'm not anymore. Here's what I can give. Others were large, 5 figures, even 6, from silent investors, philanthropists, and women-led venture groups who wanted no spotlight, just change. By year's end, Emily Carter stood before a different kind of crowd. This time it wasn't a stage. It was a construction site in East LA. A former warehouse being transformed into something the city had never seen before. The Grace Center. Named after her daughter. But built for every woman who thought she'd never rebuild. The Grace Center wasn't a shelter. It wasn't just a support line. It was a living space, a learning space, a launch pad. Inside, on-site childcare, private trauma counseling, legal aid desks, a co-working space for women entrepreneurs. dorm-style rooms for short-term safety housing, a library curated with titles like Women Who Run with the Wolves, Untamed, and The Body Keeps the Score. All of it designed by Emily's hand. Room by room, corner by corner, she poured in warmth, intention, and dignity. She remembered how lonely it felt, walking into rooms that weren't built for survivors, spaces too cold, too clinical. She vowed no woman would ever feel small in hers. On opening day, she gave no speech. She walked the halls quietly, nodding to each staff member, hugging volunteers, crouching to meet the eyes of toddlers. The center buzzed with the kind of hope you couldn't package, only pass on. Grace, now 6, ran between the chairs in her yellow dress, giggling. "This is mine?" she asked. Emily smiled. "Yours, and theirs, all of ours." In the months that followed, the Grace Center filled. There was Miriam, a 19-year-old who fled her abusive stepfather and now worked in the center's cafe, studying graphic design at night. There was Linda, a mother of 3 who once lived in her car. Now she coordinated transportation for other women trying to escape dangerous homes. There were women whose names Emily never learned, because it wasn't about her anymore. It was bigger. It was movement, legacy, a shift in the ground under women who had once been buried. At night, after Grace was asleep, Emily would sit in the corner office, not to manage, but to dream. She journaled less now. Her words were out in the world, living in bricks and beams and open doors. She'd occasionally get messages. "You saved my life. You gave me a second chance. You made me believe I could be more than a victim." She never replied, but she read every word. One evening, she found Grace drawing again. This time, a new picture. A tall building with the word Grace on top, and lots of tiny figures below. "They're not scared anymore," Grace explained, "because they have a big house to keep them safe." Emily kissed the top of her daughter's head. "You're right," she whispered, "and it'll never stop growing. Because legacy isn't just what you leave behind. It's what you build while you're still standing, so others can rise too." The letter had been tucked away for years, forgotten between pages of an old sketchbook. Emily found it on a quiet Sunday afternoon while cleaning out a box marked "Before." The handwriting was hers, soft, slanted, with hesitation in every loop. She remembered writing it. The night she'd left Marcus, before the coma, before the hospital, before the trial. She'd been packing a small bag, unsure if she'd make it out. She'd left the letter behind in case she didn't. It read, "If you're reading this, I didn't make it. I tried. I tried to believe he'd change. But love doesn't hurt like this. Please tell Grace the truth when she's ready. Tell her I fought. Tell her I chose her." Emily stared at the words for a long time, her throat tight. She wasn't that woman anymore, but she honored her. Later that evening, after Grace had gone to bed, Emily took a quiet drive. No music, just the hum of the tires and the distant buzz of city life. She passed familiar places, the florist she used to walk by, the park bench she once cried on, the corner diner she escaped to when silence at home was too loud. Then she arrived. The house, the one Marcus built, the one she'd bled in, wept in, survived in. It was empty now. For sale, overgrown lawn, windows dusty, the luxury gone hollow. She stood at the gate, fingers resting on the iron bars. Memories flickered, sharp, fast. His voice, her screams, the smell of his cologne mixed with fear. But it didn't crush her this time. It didn't bend her knees or choke her lungs. She was standing, breathing, whole. She reached into her coat pocket, unfolded the letter, and read it one last time. Then she walked up the path, slid it through the mail slot, and turned away. That chapter was over. Driving back, she didn't cry, she didn't look back. Closure doesn't always come in a courtroom. Sometimes it comes in the form of peace. Quiet, earned, absolute. Back home, Grace was curled up with a blanket on the couch, waiting up with heavy eyes. "Where'd you go, Mommy?" Emily kissed her forehead. "Just somewhere I used to be." Grace yawned. "You look happy." "I am," she whispered. She held her daughter close that night, heart full, hands steady, because she knew now she wasn't running, wasn't hiding, wasn't broken. She had faced the monster, she had reclaimed her story, and she had chosen to live. Not just survive, but live. That night, as she drifted to sleep, the past finally loosened its grip. The girl who once wrote that desperate letter was gone. In her place stood a woman who had become everything she once prayed for, and more. On Grace's 10th birthday, Emily didn't throw a party. There were no balloons, no magician, no bounce house in the backyard like previous years. Instead, she planned something different, something quieter, something sacred. That morning, Emily woke before the sun, made blueberry pancakes, Grace's favorite, and placed a small wrap box next to her daughter's plate. Grace squinted at it, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "What is it?" "Something that's been waiting for you," Emily said softly. Inside the box was a delicate silver locket. It wasn't new. In fact, it was nearly 50 years old, worn slightly at the edges but polished with care. Inside the locket were two tiny photos, one of baby Grace and one of Emily holding her, taken in the hospital just days after waking from the coma. But there was more. Under the locket, tucked neatly, was a folded note. Grace picked it up with careful fingers and read aloud. To Grace, one day you will face something that feels impossible. When that day comes, I want you to remember, you were born of survival. You come from strength, and you are never ever alone. Grace looked up, eyes wide. You wrote this? Emily nodded, her voice thick with feeling. I wrote it the night before you turned one. I was terrified, wondering if I'd be enough, wondering if I could raise a girl in a world that once tried to break me. But you did, Grace whispered. Emily smiled. I'm still doing it. They sat together at the table, the early morning light filtering through the curtains, dancing across the surface of the locket. Grace traced the tiny photo of herself. Why'd you keep it so long? Because it wasn't just jewelry, Emily said. It's a reminder. Of what? That our story didn't end in pain. It started there, but it didn't stay there. And one day when you're older, you'll tell your story too. Maybe not on a stage, maybe not in a book, but in how you walk, how you speak, how you love. Grace pressed the locket to her chest. Will you help me remember? You'll never forget, Emily said, because it's inside you. Later that day, they walked through the Grace Center together. Emily showed her daughter the new wing being built, a space for teenage girls recovering from family violence. Grace asked questions, listened carefully. She wasn't a baby anymore. She understood more than Emily sometimes realized. At the center's library, Grace paused at a shelf and pulled down a book, The 48 Laws of Power. Was this yours? She asked. Emily laughed. It was. I read it when I had nothing left but my mind. It helped me see the world more clearly, taught me how to protect what matters. Can I read it? Someday, Emily said, brushing her hair back. But for now, just wear the locket. That's your armor. That night, Grace fell asleep with the locket still around her neck. Emily stood by the door watching her chest rise and fall, her fingers curled around the chain. And in that quiet, candlelit moment, Emily felt something she hadn't in a long time. Not relief, not survival. Something deeper, peace. Because she had given her daughter more than safety. She had given her a compass, a voice, a name that meant something, and a story that would never be silenced again. It began as a journal entry, just a quiet evening ritual. Emily had started journaling again after Grace's 10th birthday. The moment with the locket awakened something, a knowing, a desire to say what had been lived, not just survived. But one night, as she sat in her small study, the words took on a different shape. They were no longer just for her. They were for everyone. For every woman still hiding bruises beneath sweaters. For every daughter who watched her mother flinch at loud voices. For every survivor who wondered if healing was even possible. She titled it simply, Dear World. And she wrote, Dear World, I am not a victim. I am not a cautionary tale, nor a viral headline. I am a mother, a designer, a woman who rebuilt herself from ashes and still walks barefoot through her garden without fear. I once believed silence was safety. I once believed survival meant staying invisible. I was wrong. This world taught me pain before it taught me love, but it also taught me resilience. Taught me that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just whispers, try again tomorrow. I've buried versions of myself, and I've met new ones in their place. Each scar has a name. Each memory has a weight, but none of them define me. What defines me is what I chose to do next. I built a center. I raised a daughter. I spoke when it was easier to stay quiet, and I forgave, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. If you're reading this and your voice is still trembling, let it. If your hands are still shaking, lift them anyway. You don't have to be whole to begin. Start broken. Just start. To the women of tomorrow, know your worth before someone tries to rewrite it for you. To the fathers who stood by their daughters, you are more powerful than you know. To the systems that failed me, We're rebuilding without you. And to Grace, my reason, my revolution, my forever, I see you. I hear you. I believe in everything you will become. This letter may end, but the story doesn't, because the truth has legs. And love, when rooted in truth, never dies. With all I have, Emily Carter, she printed 5 copies. One she mailed to the State Archive to be stored in a collection titled Voices of Justice. One she framed and hung in the Grace Center's welcome hallway. One she left on her bedside table. One she buried in a time capsule with Grace for her future granddaughter. And the final copy? She burned. Not in anger, not in sadness, but as a symbol that her words were now in the world. And she didn't need to hold on to them anymore. The flames crackled softly in the backyard fire pit, sending smoke into a cool California sky. Emily watched them rise with a calm smile, because she knew the world had heard her. And even long after her voice quieted, her message would never be silenced again. The morning was unremarkable. Blue sky, light breeze, a coffee mug half full on the windowsill, the kind of day most people would forget. But not Grace. She would remember this one forever. Now 17, Grace Carter stood at the entrance of the Grace Center in a tailored blazer, her dark curls pinned neatly, her mother's locket resting just above her heart. Today wasn't about her. It was about them. The women arriving with fear in their eyes, suitcases in hand, hope clutched quietly between their ribs, just like her mother once had. The center had grown. 3 branches now, plans for 2 more. A scholarship fund, a podcast, a team of staff who spoke softly but moved mountains. And Grace? She'd found her calling. Not in law, like some expected, but in community building. She understood people. She made them feel seen. That morning, she walked through the halls as Emily once had, checking on staff, pausing to crouch beside a scared child in the daycare room, sharing a silent nod with a woman holding her first lease agreement. In the main lobby stood a bronze plaque with words she knew by heart. You were born of survival, but you are not made of ash. You are the seed that grew from it. Emily Carter. Some visitors took photos beside it. Others ran their fingers over the engraving. Grace simply smiled when she passed. She didn't need the plaque to remember. Her mother was everywhere. In the floral wallpaper Emily had handpicked for the playroom. In the community kitchen stocked with fresh herbs, because healing also meant eating well. In the echo of every story whispered in safety. That afternoon, Grace sat on the rooftop garden, journaling. She used a Mont Blanc pen, her mother's old one, still smooth, still gold-trimmed. The sun dipped behind the downtown LA skyline, painting the sky in amber and lavender. Her journal read, "She never wanted to be famous. She wanted to be free. And she made sure I never had to fight the same battle. But if I do, I'll win, because I carry her in me." The door behind her opened. "Ready?" a soft voice asked. It was Maria, now retired but still visiting once a week to teach life skills classes. Grace stood, tucking the journal away. "I'm always ready," she said. They walked downstairs together, through a hallway of laughter and lavender-scented calm. That evening, Grace addressed a group of young women, some still trembling, some already rising. She didn't tell them how strong they were. She didn't need to. She showed them. In her stance, in her voice, in the way she paused when one girl wiped away a tear and nodded. When the talk ended, the applause was soft but meaningful. One girl stood, barely more than 15, and whispered, "Are you Emily Carter's daughter?" Grace nodded, smiling through the swell in her throat. "Yes," she said. "But more than that, I'm yours too. We're all part of her story now." That night, back home, Grace placed her mother's framed letter beside her bed. Outside, the wind carried the faintest scent of jasmine. And somewhere, in the quiet between stars, the echo of a voice long gone whispered, "You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become." And Grace, she chose light. She chose legacy. She chose to keep walking, never alone. So the story comes to a close. And if you're still here, my dear friends, right now, in this moment, I know one thing for sure. Something in this story touched your heart. Maybe it reminded you of your own strength. Maybe it helped you see someone you love more clearly. Or maybe, just maybe, it gave you the courage to believe in healing. Let's pause together and look at it with a new lens. Like the Stoic Marcus Aurelius once said, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Emily didn't just survive what stood in her way, she became the way for others. She turned trauma into legacy, pain into purpose, darkness into a guiding light. And maybe that's the real lesson here. You are not your past. You are not your scars. You are what you choose, moment by moment, to become. If this story moved you even just a little, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe, because this is just the beginning of more stories that matter. We're here, we see you, and together we keep going.
The flashbulbs were a blinding, percussive assault. From the back of a damp Chicago taxi, Nancy Pierce watched the man who had shattered her life step onto the red carpet. John Peake, her ex-husband, looked immaculate in a custom Tom Ford tux. On his arm was Tiffany, the 24-year-old influencer he'd left her for. They were the city's golden couple. And Nancy, 6 months pregnant with the child he'd abandoned before it was even a whisper, was the forgotten chapter. Tonight, he expected her to be a ghost. He never imagined she was the guest of honor. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, a day already thick with the smell of turpentine and the metallic tang of morning sickness. It was nestled between a final notice from the gas company and a flyer for a discount pizza parlor. The envelope was so thick, so heavy with implied importance, that Nancy initially thought it was a mistake. She wiped her hands, stained with gesso, on her denim apron. Her small one-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park was her sanctuary and her prison, paid for with the last dregs of her meager divorce settlement. The cardstock was a creamy, impossible weight. Engraved in sweeping gold calligraphy were the words, "The St. Jude Children's Foundation Annual Hope Gala." Nancy's breath caught. Her stomach, already protesting the pregnancy, did a painful flip. This was their gala, hers and John's. For 5 consecutive years, it had been the pinnacle of their social calendar. It was the night John Peake, a rising star in corporate finance, solidified his connections, laughed with the city's elite, and showcased his beautiful, elegant, and silent wife. Nancy had played her part perfectly. A graceful accessory in the gilded cage of their marriage. She had chosen the gowns, networked with the wives of his superiors, and smiled until her face ached, all to fuel the ascent of the man she loved. Now, holding the invitation in her cramped apartment, the memories felt like an assault. The scent of John's ridiculously expensive cologne, the cold weight of the diamond necklace he'd called her reward for a successful quarter, and the low, dismissive tone he used when she dared to mention her own dreams. Historical preservation, Nancy? Be serious, he'd scoffed one evening, swirling a glass of scotch that cost more than her monthly groceries did now. It's a dusty, pointless hobby. Your job is to support me. Our future is in this boardroom, not some grimy workshop. He had whittled her down, piece by piece, until her passion for bringing history back to life was nothing more than a secret shame she indulged in when he was away on business trips. Then came the ultimate betrayal. Tiffany, a woman whose entire life was a curated collection of brand deals and vapid inspirational quotes. John hadn't even had the decency to be discreet. He'd left Nancy with a sterile email from his lawyer and a gnawing emptiness that felt like a physical wound. The divorce had been swift and brutal. He had the better lawyers, the public sympathy he'd manufactured, and the social standing. He took the house, the friends, the life they had built. Nancy was left with a settlement that barely covered 6 months of rent and the crushing weight of her own perceived failure. 2 weeks after the ink was dry, she'd stood over the toilet in this tiny apartment, watching 2 pink lines appear on a plastic stick. Pregnant. She had tried to tell him. She'd called his lawyer, her voice trembling. The response came via email. Mr. Peake considers this a desperate, last-ditch attempt at extortion. He will not be entertaining any further claims. He hadn't just left her. He had left them. So why, after 2 years of silence, was this invitation here? She scanned the card again, and her heart sank. sank. At the bottom, in smaller print, featuring the unveiling of the designs for the new Haven of Hope pediatric wing, courtesy of a private benefactor. Her designs, her wing. For the last 18 months, Nancy had poured her soul into that project. After the divorce, she'd taken what little she had and started a small, one-woman design firm, Pierce Preservation. She worked out of this apartment, taking on small, forgotten projects from minor historical societies. Then, 6 months ago, an inquiry had come through a secure portal from a law firm representing an anonymous client. They had a damaged 1920s-era hospital wing they wanted to restore and redesign. They were looking for someone with a delicate touch, someone who valued authenticity over speed. They had seen her pro bono work on a small library in Pullman and were impressed. The pay was astronomical, enough to secure a future for her and her baby for years. But it was more than that. Working on the Haven of Hope wing had been a spiritual journey. In the quiet solitude of her apartment, with the smell of old blueprints and wood samples, she had meticulously designed a space that wasn't sterile. A place that didn't feel like a hospital, but a sanctuary. She'd brought the soul of the old building back to life, integrating it with state-of-the-art medical technology. The client, known to her only as Mr. Thorne through his lawyers, had been respectful, demanding, and utterly professional. Now he was unveiling his prized project at the very gala that symbolized her old life. She had to be there. Her contract stipulated her attendance. It was non-negotiable. Her best friend, Jenna, a fiery journalist who had been her rock, was ecstatic. "This is it, Nance. This is your moment," she'd shouted over the phone. "You are not going as John Peake's pathetic ex-wife. You are going as Nancy Pierce, the brilliant architect who is giving sick kids a place to heal. You have to rub it in his face. He'll be there, Jenna." "With her," Nancy whispered, the words tasting like ash. The thought of John seeing her, pregnant, the humiliation, the judgment. "So, let him see you," Jenna's voice was fierce. "Let him see the incredible woman who is building a life and a baby on her own 2 feet. Let him see the talent he called a dusty hobby. This isn't about him anymore. This is about you claiming your victory." Jenna was right. But the thought of seeing John, of feeling his dismissive gaze on her swollen body, sent a tremor of pure, unadulterated fear through her. It was one thing to be a success in the quiet anonymity of her apartment. It was another to face the architect of her heartbreak in the arena where he was king. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window. The woman staring back was tired, her face a little thinner despite the pregnancy, but her eyes held a spark of determination. She took a deep breath, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. She would go. Not for revenge, and not for John. She would go for the woman in the reflection, for the child beneath her heart, and for the haven of hope waiting to be seen. Preparing for the gala felt like excavating an archaeological dig of her former self. In the back of her closet, behind the practical maternity jeans and comfortable sweaters that defined her current life, was a single garment bag. Inside hung the ghost of Nancy Peake, a floor-length gown of shimmering navy silk by a designer whose name she could no longer bring herself to say. It had cost a sickening amount of money, purchased for the last gala she'd attended with John. He had picked it out, of course. "It makes you look appropriate," he'd commented, his approval as thin and cold as the fabric itself. Appropriate. Not beautiful, not stunning. Appropriate. A suitable accessory. She pulled it out. The zipper wouldn't even go up halfway over her new body. A wave of self-loathing washed over her, followed by a sudden, sharp anger. Wearing this, even if it did fit, would feel like donning a costume of her own subjugation. It represented everything she was trying to escape. a woman whose value was determined by the man on her arm and the label on her back. With a resolve that surprised her, she zipped the bag shut and pushed it back into the darkness. She would not wear John's armor to this battle. She had so little money. The fee from Mr. Thorne was secure, but it was locked in escrow until the project's public launch. Tonight, her credit cards were hovering near their limits. She went to a high-end consignment shop on Armitage Avenue, a place where the city's elite shed their last season treasures. She felt a familiar pang of shame, remembering when she used to donate to places like this, not shop at them. After an hour of searching, her back aching and her feet swelling, she found it. It was a dress that the old Nancy would never have dared to wear. It was a deep forest green velvet, a maternity cut that was deceptively simple. It didn't try to hide her pregnancy. It celebrated it. The velvet draped over her bump in a way that was elegant, strong, and utterly defiant. It had long sleeves, a modest neckline, and seemed to drink the light. It wasn't a brand that screamed for attention. It was just beautiful. It felt like her. She paired it with the only 2 pieces of expensive jewelry she'd fought for in the divorce. A simple pair of pearl earrings, her grandmother's, and a delicate antique silver bracelet. They were the only things that hadn't come from John. On the night of the gala, a nervous energy buzzed under her skin. She did her own hair and makeup, a skill she'd honed from years of watching professionals. The result wasn't the flawless, sculpted mask she used to wear. Her hair was a simple, elegant chignon. Her makeup was minimal, highlighting the new fullness in her face. The woman in the mirror was not a doll. She was a woman with a story in her eyes. A survivor. A mother. Taking a taxi instead of the chauffeured town car of her past, she felt a strange sense of liberation. The cab pulled up to the grand entrance of the Chicago Museum of Art, its marble columns illuminated by dramatic spotlights. The familiar scene unfolded before her. The crush of photographers, the flashbulbs painting the night white, the parade of sleek black cars depositing men in tailored tuxedos and women in glittering gowns. For a moment, panic seized her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was a mistake. She was an imposter here, a pregnant sparrow trying to fly amongst peacocks. What was she thinking? She saw them then, stepping out of a gleaming black Bentley. John, looking impossibly handsome and confident, and Tiffany, on his arm, a confection of pale pink chiffon and diamonds, laughing that high, tinkling laugh that always seemed to be for an invisible audience. Nancy shrank back in her seat, a physical pain lancing through her. "Mom, you getting out?" the cab driver asked, his voice rough. "Go," she whispered, her voice choked. "Just go around the block, please." She couldn't do it. She couldn't walk in there. She couldn't face them. She couldn't endure the whispers, the pitying looks, the realization on John's face. As the cab circled, her phone buzzed. It was a text from the event coordinator. "Ms. Pierce, Mr. Thorne's assistant is looking for you. He'd like to ensure you are settled in comfortably before the unveiling. Please find Ms. Albright upon your arrival." The name Thorne was like a splash of cold water. This wasn't about John. This was about her work. This was her professional obligation. Her masterpiece, the design that had cost her 18 months of sleepless nights and tears, was in that building. She had spent over a year of her life on it. She would not let John Peake, a man who couldn't tell a blueprint from a placemat, take this night from her, too. Her hand went to her belly. "We will not," she thought. "Stop here," she told the driver, her voice firm. She paid the fare, stepped out of the cab, and, ignoring the chaotic glamour of the red carpet, walked straight towards a discreet side entrance marked "Staff and Featured Guests." The side entrance was a blessed relief. Instead of the judgmental glare of the press, she was met by a polite security guard and a woman with a clipboard. "Ms. Pierce?" the woman asked, her smile professional. Yes, Nancy said, her voice steadier than she felt. Wonderful. Miss Albright is waiting for you just inside. Mr. Thorne is so looking forward to meeting you. Your work is... Well, he's truly impressed. The guard checked his list, nodded respectfully, and opened the door. Inside, the cacophony of the entrance faded into the sophisticated hum of the event. The air in the vast, vaulted hall smelled of hothouse flowers and money. Waitstaff moved with silent efficiency, balancing trays of champagne and sparkling water. Nancy gratefully took a water. The hall was filled with the city's most powerful people, their conversations a low, melodic buzz. And then she saw him, John. He was holding court near the grand staircase, Tiffany clinging to his arm, looking up at him with doe-eyed adoration. He was in his element, the center of his universe. Nancy's stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. The baby gave a sharp kick, as if sensing her distress. She felt a primal urge to turn and flee, to run back to the safety of her small apartment and the comforting smell of turpentine. But then her eyes drifted past him, towards the stage at the far end of the hall. Upon it, shrouded in a sheet of St. Jude's blue velvet, was a large, beautifully crafted 3D architectural model. Her purpose. Straightening her shoulders, she lifted her chin. She was no longer Nancy Peake, the timid wife. She was Nancy Pierce, the architect, and she had every right to be here. She tried to remain inconspicuous, skirting the edges of the crowd, her eyes fixed on the velvet-draped easel. She was an artist, not a socialite. She just needed to get through the next hour, see her work unveiled, and then slip away before anyone noticed her. But in a room where every glance was a transaction and every face was catalogued, anonymity was a luxury she couldn't afford. Especially not now. She could feel the first few curious glances at her belly, the whispers starting. Is that? I thought he... Well, well, well. Look what the cat dragged in. The voice, dripping with saccharine condescension, cut through the ambient noise. Nancy froze, her back rigid. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. John, she composed herself. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her water. She placed a calming hand on her stomach. Then she turned. He stood there, a smug, predatory grin plastered on his face. Tiffany was beside him, her expression a perfect mask of polite curiosity. But her eyes, sharp and critical, were doing a swift, brutal appraisal of Nancy's dress, her hair, her very presence, and then their eyes collectively dropped to her stomach. The smug grin on John's face vanished, replaced by a mask of slack-jawed, uncomprehending shock. Tiffany's perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth. "John," Nancy said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Tiffany, you both look well." John's eyes, wide and furious, snapped from her belly to her face. "Nancy, what is this?" His voice was a low growl, his public smile forgotten. He was looking at her pregnancy as if it were a betrayal of him. I'm surprised to see you here," Tiffany chimed in, recovering first, her voice a high-pitched giggle. "Oh, Nancy, sweetheart, are you okay? Did you get a temp job with the catering staff?" The jab was designed to hurt, to remind her of her fall from grace. The old Nancy would have flushed with shame, stammered a defense, and withered under his scorn. But the woman standing before him now was forged in the fire of his betrayal. "No, Tiffany," she replied, her tone cool and even. "I was invited." "Oh, that's so sweet," Tiffany cooed, laying a hand on John's arm, though he didn't seem to notice. He was still staring at Nancy's stomach, his face a thundercloud of calculation and rage. "I'm sure they sent invitations to all their past donors. It's probably a mailing list error." but it's brave of you to come anyway. So brave. The word brave was coded in pity, meant to sting more than any outright insult. John finally found his voice, his shock morphing into a familiar, cold contempt. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for those nearby to hear. Listen, Nancy. I know things have been tough. And now, this. He gestured dismissively at her stomach. You don't have to crash parties for a free meal. If you're short on cash, especially with that, just call my assistant. I can spare something, for old times' sake. The public humiliation was his goal. He wanted the onlookers, his peers and rivals, to see him as magnanimous, and her as a charity case, a desperate, pregnant ex-wife trying to trap him. He was rewriting their history in real time. The blood rushed to her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to lash out, to tell him what a hollow, insecure man he truly was. To scream, "This is your child." The child you refused to even acknowledge. But she remembered Jenna's words. This isn't about him anymore. To lose her temper, to cry, to make a scene. That would be giving him the victory he so desperately craved. So she smiled. It was a small, enigmatic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. That's very generous of you to offer, John, but I'm doing just fine. Fine? He scoffed, gesturing around the opulent hall. This was our life, Nancy. Look at you now. That dress. Did you get it at a thrift store? And you're all alone. And God. He couldn't stop staring at her bump. It's just sad. I think her dress is lovely. The new voice was smooth as aged whiskey. All three of them turned. A man had approached their small, toxic circle, seemingly from nowhere. He was tall, perhaps a decade older than John, and impeccably dressed in a bespoke tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. His hair was the color of salt and pepper, and his eyes, a startlingly intense shade of grey, held an air of quiet authority that was palpable. He wasn't boyishly handsome like John. He was something far more compelling. He was powerful. The air around him seemed to crackle with it. He looked directly at Nancy, his gaze ignoring John and Tiffany completely. "Forest green," he said, his voice warm. "It's a bold and intelligent choice. It complements your eyes." Nancy was momentarily speechless. Who was this man? John, however, was not. His face, which had been a mask of smug superiority, was now clouded with confusion and annoyance. He hated being interrupted, hated being upstaged even more. "I'm sorry, do we know you?" John asked, his tone brusque. The man's grey eyes finally shifted to John, and they were utterly devoid of warmth. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure," he said, his voice polite but dismissive. He then turned his full attention back to Nancy, his eyes softening as they briefly dropped to her stomach and then met her gaze with profound respect. "You must be Ms. Pierce. I've been looking for you." Nancy's mind raced. "Ms. Pierce? How did he know her name?" Before she could answer, the man extended a hand. "Marcus Thorne, it is an absolute honor to finally meet you in person." Thorne. The name hit Nancy like a lightning bolt. Mr. Thorne, her anonymous benefactor, the owner of the project. The blood drained from John's face. He knew the name, of course. Everyone in this room knew the name Marcus Thorne. He was a titan of industry, a reclusive billionaire known for his ruthless business acumen and, more recently, his world-class philanthropy. He was a legend, a man who rarely attended public events and whose influence dwarfed John's own considerable success into insignificance. John Peake was a player in the city. Marcus Thorne owned the game. You're Nancy's client?" John stammered, the words catching in his throat. Marcus's gaze flickered back to John, cold and sharp as splintered ice. He didn't answer the question directly. Instead, he offered his arm to Nancy. "Miss Pierce, would you allow me to escort you? We have a masterpiece to unveil." Without a second glance at her stunned ex-husband or his gaping new wife, Nancy placed her hand on Marcus Thorne's arm. As he led her away, she could feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her. But for the first time, she felt none of their judgment. The venom of John's smile had been rendered utterly impotent. The game had just changed. Walking through the crowded ballroom on Marcus Thorne's arm was a surreal experience. The sea of powerful people parted for them, as if by an invisible force. The whispers that had followed her earlier, tinged with pity and speculation, now morphed into a buzz of frantic curiosity. "That's Nancy Peake, with Marcus Thorne. Did you see John's face? I thought she was... Wait, is she the architect for the new wing?" She was no longer an anonymous ghost. She was a mystery. And in this world, mystery was a form of currency. Marcus guided her to a cordoned-off area near the stage where a few chairs were reserved. He was a perfect gentleman, attentive but not overbearing. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said in a low voice, his eyes scanning her face with concern. "I overheard your former acquaintance. His lack of grace is surpassed only by his lack of perception." "You didn't have to do that, Mr. Thorne. Please call me Marcus." "And yes, I did," he replied, his gaze firm. "Talent should be protected from arrogance. And your talent, Miss Pierce, is generational." His words were so sincere, so direct, they left her momentarily breathless. John had only ever praised her for how she reflected on him. Marcus was praising her for who she was. A hush fell over the room as the event's master of ceremonies took the stage. He spoke about the foundation, the importance of charity, and then he began the introduction Nancy had been dreading and anticipating. And now, for the moment we've all been waiting for. Tonight, we are privileged to witness the public debut of the Haven of Hope Pediatric Wing. This project has been brought to life thanks to the generosity of its benefactor, the esteemed Mr. Marcus Thorne, and the breathtaking skill of a truly remarkable architect. Nancy's heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Mr. Thorne has broken with tradition tonight. The world of architecture is often one of quiet, behind-the-scenes work, but he believes that genius of this caliber deserves to be celebrated. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage the woman who designed the Haven of Hope, Ms. Nancy Pierce. A polite, then growingly enthusiastic round of applause filled the hall. A spotlight found her. For a terrifying second, she was frozen. She felt Marcus's hand give a gentle, reassuring squeeze on her arm. "Go on," he murmured. "Take your bow. You've earned it." She walked up the small set of stairs to the stage, her legs feeling like jelly. The light was blinding. She could only see the first few rows of faces, and there, in the front row, where the most important donors were seated, was John. His face was a mask of utter, uncomprehending shock. Tiffany sat beside him, her jaw practically on the floor, her perfectly applied lipstick forming a small O of disbelief. They had thought she was a caterer, a charity case, a desperate, pregnant fool, and now she was the guest of honor. The whiplash of it was written all over their faces. The MC gestured to her. "Miss Pierce, would you do us the honor?" With trembling hands, Nancy walked over to the velvet-draped model. She took hold of the heavy fabric. This was it. This was not for them. This was for her child, for all the children who would heal there. She pulled the velvet away. A collective gasp swept through the audience. There, under the warm glow of the stage lights, was the model. It was luminous. Nancy hadn't just designed a building. She had resurrected a soul. She had kept the 1920s brick facade, but opened the back with a soaring glass atrium that overlooked a new therapeutic garden. The interiors, shown on large renderings beside the model, were filled with light, curved wood, and hidden nooks for families. It was a space of profound grace and resilience. For a long moment, the room was utterly silent. Then the applause started. It wasn't the polite clapping from before. It was a thunderous, rolling ovation. Nancy stood beside her work, tears welling in her eyes. This was the validation she had craved for years, not from a man, but from her own craft. It was the public declaration that the passion John had dismissed as a dusty hobby was, in fact, a rare and powerful gift. From the front row, she watched John. He was clapping, but it was a mechanical, empty gesture. His eyes were wide, darting from the model to Nancy and back again. The cogs were turning in his brain. He had thrown away a diamond, believing it to be a common stone. As the ovation began to subside, Marcus Thorne ascended the stage. He moved with an unhurried grace that commanded attention without demanding it. He stood beside Nancy, though he didn't address the audience at first. He simply looked at the model, his expression one of profound reverence. "Extraordinary," he murmured, his voice just for her. Even more so than in the renderings. Then he turned to the microphone. "Thank you all," he began, his voice a rich baritone that filled the hall effortlessly. Tonight is about supporting the vital work of the St. Jude Foundation, but it is also about celebrating the preservation of beauty and history. He gestured towards the model. "I acquired this wing a year ago. It was in a deplorable state, neglected, damaged, its soul hidden beneath layers of decay. Many experts told me it was a lost cause. They suggested a tear down. They suggested famous firms who would charge a fortune to build a glass box." He paused, his grey eyes sweeping across the room, finally landing for a fraction of a second on John Peake. "But I wasn't looking for a glass box. I was looking for a resurrection. I was looking for a single artist with not just the skill, but the empathy to understand what this building needed. Someone who knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to hold immense value while being dismissed as worthless." Nancy's breath hitched. Was he talking about the building, or was he talking about her? "My search led me to Ms. Nancy Pierce," Marcus continued, turning to face her. The warmth in his eyes was staggering. "It led me to a small, unassuming firm where true magic was being performed. Ms. Pierce doesn't just restore buildings, she restores spirit. She has a gift that cannot be taught. She listens to the story the architecture wants to tell. She looked at this broken, forgotten wing and saw not what it was, but what it always had been." He took Nancy's hand. His grip was warm and firm. "The world is filled with technicians. Ms. Pierce is a visionary. This city is fortunate to have her. I am fortunate to have found her. Thank you, Nancy, for giving the haven of hope its voice back." He began to applaud, and the room joined him, the sound even more deafening than before. It was an ovation, not just for the design, but for her. John's dismissal echoed in her mind, a dusty, pointless hobby, and it sounded so foolish, so utterly ignorant, that she almost laughed. As Marcus led her off the stage, the night became a blur. People surged forward, a constellation of the city's most influential figures, all clamoring for an introduction. Curators from the museum, wealthy donors, hospital board members. They all wanted to talk to her, to praise her work, to ask about her process. She answered their questions, her voice gaining confidence with each interaction. She spoke of pigment composition in the original 1920s murals she was restoring, of the structural challenges of the glass atrium, of the principles of biophilic design used to aid healing. She was an expert in her field, and for the first time she was being seen as one. Through it all, Marcus remained by her side, a quiet, formidable presence. He deflected the overly aggressive, facilitated introductions with the insightful, and ensured her water glass was never empty. She caught a glimpse of John across the room. He was standing alone, Tiffany having been absorbed by a gaggle of other young, beautiful wives. He was watching Nancy, his expression a toxic cocktail of fury, bewilderment, and something she had never seen on his face before: regret. He looked like a man who had just watched his losing lottery ticket get struck by lightning. Later, in a quieter moment near the terrace, Nancy finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Marcus, your speech. You said you were looking for someone who knew what it felt like to be overlooked. How could you have known?" A small, sad smile touched his lips. "My firm does extensive due diligence before engaging in any significant contract, Miss Pierce, especially one involving an asset of this value. I don't just research a person's professional history. I research their character." He met her gaze, his own eyes filled with a surprising depth of understanding. "I read about your divorce. I read the slanderous, one-sided articles that your ex-husband's publicist planted in the society pages. I saw the narrative he tried to create. And then," he continued, "I saw your work, and I realized that the man who wrote that narrative was a fool. He was a man who owned a priceless work of art and kept it in a dark, dusty attic because he was too blind to see its worth. I simply provided the gallery it deserved." The directness of his analogy, the sheer, breathtaking validation of it, struck Nancy to her core. He hadn't just hired an architect. He had seen her. It was then that she saw John approaching them, his face a thunderous mask. He had finally decided he couldn't stand being irrelevant in her story any longer. John stormed towards them, his movement stiff with fury. The practiced charm he wore like a second skin had vanished, leaving behind the raw, ugly entitlement that Nancy knew so well. He ignored Marcus completely, his eyes locked on her, blazing with a possessive anger that made her skin crawl. "Nancy, we need to talk," he said, his voice a low, commanding growl. He didn't ask. He ordered. Before Nancy could even form a response, Marcus stepped slightly forward. A subtle but unmistakable movement that placed him between her and John. "I don't believe Miss Pierce has anything to say to you, Mr. Peake." John's jaw tightened. He finally acknowledged the other man, his eyes narrowing with contempt. "This is a private matter. It's between me and Nancy. You have no idea what our history is." "On the contrary," Marcus replied, his voice dangerously soft. "I have an excellent idea of your history, and from what I can surmise, it's a history Ms. Pierce is rightly putting behind her." The blatant dismissal sent a wave of dark red flushing up John's neck. He was a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room. To be so thoroughly and calmly neutered by Marcus Thorne was a public emasculation he couldn't bear. He turned his venom back to Nancy, his voice dripping with false intimacy. "Nance, don't be foolish," he hissed, trying to draw her in. "Don't you see what this is? He's using you. Men like him, they collect pretty things. You restored his building. Now you're the flavor of the month." He took a step closer, his eyes dropping to her stomach again, his voice lowering. "You're carrying my child, Nancy. My child. You think I'm going to let some collector play house with my family?" It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to reclaim ownership, to position himself as her protector, as the father, after he had explicitly rejected that role. The audacity of it, after years of belittling her passion and months of abandoning his child, was staggering. Nancy felt a cold, clear anger rise within her, silencing the last vestiges of her fear. "You didn't discover me, John," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even herself. You tried to bury me. And this, she said, placing a hand on her belly, is not your family. You made that clear when you had your lawyer accuse me of extortion. This is my child and my life. The truth of her words hung in the air between them, sharp and undeniable. John's face contorted, a mixture of rage and desperation. He was losing control. He reached out, his hand grasping for her arm. "Nancy, stop this nonsense," and he never finished the sentence. In one smooth, deliberate motion, Marcus moved. He didn't push John. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned to Nancy, his intense grey eyes searching hers. He saw the flicker of old fear she was trying to fight. He saw the new strength warring with years of conditioning, and in that moment he made a decision. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. The noisy gala seemed to fade into a distant hum. The world narrowed to the space between them. "You are a masterpiece, Nancy Pierce," he whispered, his voice for her alone. "Never let anyone convince you otherwise." And then he kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of fiery, romantic passion. It was something far more profound. It was a kiss of respect, of protection, of unwavering support. It was a silent, public declaration. It said, "She is with me. She is valued. She is off limits." It was a shield and a coronation all in one. For Nancy, it was a moment of absolute stillness. The warmth of his lips was a startling, grounding reality. It was the antithesis of John's cold, transactional affection. This was a kiss that gave rather than took, and across from them, John Peake froze. It was a total system failure. His body went rigid. His hand, which had been reaching for Nancy, dropped to his side as if it had been severed. His mouth hung slightly open. His eyes, wide with disbelief, were locked on the sight of Marcus Thorne, the most powerful man in the room, kissing the pregnant ex-wife he had just tried to humiliate. The world around John didn't just stop. It shattered. Every calculation he had ever made about his life, his status, and his ex-wife was rendered spectacularly, catastrophically wrong. The narrative he controlled so carefully had been hijacked and rewritten in a single, silent gesture. He wasn't the powerful man benevolently pitying his pathetic ex. He was the fool, the colossal, blind fool who had thrown away a treasure and a family that was now being claimed by a king. The pop flash of a photographer's camera from across the room broke the spell. The light illuminated John's face, capturing his expression of pure, unadulterated shock for posterity. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a sickly, pale grey. He looked from Nancy to Marcus and back again, his mind frantically trying to process the new reality. He was no longer the main character in this story. He was a footnote. The kiss ended. Marcus didn't release her immediately, keeping his hands on her arms as if to steady her. He looked down at her, a question in his eyes. Nancy gave him the smallest of nods, a silent thank you. When she finally looked back at her ex-husband, she felt nothing. No triumph, no pity, not even anger. He was just a man, small and insignificant, frozen in the wreckage of his own arrogance. The hold he'd had on her for more than a decade was well and truly broken. The aftermath of the kiss was not a loud explosion, but a seismic shift. The collective gasp had been replaced by a frantic, electric hum of whispers. Phones previously hidden were now held at discreet angles. Tiffany reappeared at John's side, her face a mask of cold horror. She had seen it all. She looked at John, not with love, but with the pragmatic chill of a stockholder watching her portfolio turn to ash. "John," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "Do something. Everyone is staring." The click-pop of another professional camera from a society columnist broke his paralysis. "We're leaving," he snarled, finally looking at Tiffany. He grabbed her elbow, his grip far from gentle. It was angry and bruising. "Now!" He didn't spare another glance for Nancy. To look at her again would be to acknowledge the full, catastrophic scale of his misjudgment. He bulldozed his way through the crowd, dragging a stumbling Tiffany behind him. Their exit was not the grand departure of a power couple, but the hasty, shameful retreat of the utterly defeated. Nancy watched them go, but she felt a strange, disconnected calm. "Let's get some air," Marcus said, his hand on the small of her back, a warm, grounding presence. He expertly guided her away, not towards the main exit, but through a side door she hadn't noticed, which led to a long, quiet gallery hall. The noise of the gala faded behind them. Finally, he pushed open a set of heavy glass doors, and they stepped out onto a private terrace. The cool night air was a blessing. Below them, the city sprawled out, a breathtaking tapestry of glittering lights. "Are you all right?" Marcus asked again. Nancy took a deep, shuddering breath and let it out slowly. "I am," she said, the words feeling truer than she could have imagined. "More than all right. I feel quiet." She turned to him. "Thank you for all of it." "There is no need to thank me for recognizing the truth," he said, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "I've spent my life in rooms like that. They are jungles of ego. Men like your ex-husband build their sense of self by diminishing others." He turned to her, a flicker of something stern and protective in his eyes. "My father was a man like that. I have very little tolerance for bullies." They stood in a comfortable silence. "You know," Nancy mused, her voice soft, "he'll probably convince himself that I did all of this for him. For revenge, to make him jealous." Marcus's expression was unreadable. Does it matter what he thinks? The question, so simple and direct, struck her. For years, John's opinion had been the sun her entire world orbited. And now? She thought of his enraged, humiliated face. She felt nothing. "No," she said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. "It doesn't matter at all." Marcus leaned against the balustrade, looking out at the city. "I commissioned you, Nancy," he said, his voice pulling her back to the present, "because your preliminary analysis of the original 1920s structure was the most insightful I had ever read. You wrote about the architect's use of light as a passive healing agent. No other firm noticed that. It was then I knew you were the one." He was meticulously deconstructing the night for her, ensuring she understood. This wasn't a fairy tale rescue. Her talent was the cause. His admiration was the effect. He hadn't swooped in to save a damsel. He had invested in a master and was now protecting his investment. It was a gesture of profound professional and personal respect. "Your personal history," he continued, "was irrelevant to my decision. But it made me determined to ensure that your re-emergence into this world was on your own terms. As the hour grew late, he arranged for his personal driver to take her home. As the uniformed driver held the door open, Marcus took her hand. "The Haven of Hope wing is just the beginning," he said, his tone casual, but his eyes were intent and serious. "I'm acquiring the land for a new sister hospital in Boston, the main campus. It's a massive project. It's been mismanaged for years, and the current plans have no soul." He held her gaze. "It needs a new lead architect, someone with an impeccable eye and an understanding of an artwork's soul. Someone who can find the hidden masterpieces the rest of the world has overlooked. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a mission, a new canvas. He was offering her a space to use her unique gift, not just to restore old works, but to build new ones." Nancy looked at this powerful, intelligent man. Then she thought of her small apartment, her quiet studio, and the life she had painstakingly rebuilt for herself, piece by tiny piece. This time, she wouldn't be entering this world as a +1. She would be entering it through the front door, with her name, Nancy Pierce, on the letterhead, celebrated for the work of her own hands and the vision of her own mind. A radiant, genuine smile lit up her face, a smile that came from a place of deep, hard-won peace. "I think," she said, her voice full of a hope and excitement she hadn't felt in years, "that I would be very interested in hearing more." As the sleek car pulled away from the Grand Museum, Nancy looked out the window. She wasn't leaving a battlefield. She was leaving a monument to a past life she had now fully laid to rest. The road ahead was unknown, an unpainted canvas, but for the first time in a very long time, she was holding the brush, and she wasn't just building for herself anymore. She was building for two. Nancy's story isn't just about a woman finding a new man. It's about a woman finding herself again, and in doing so, securing a future for her child. It's a powerful reminder that our worth is not defined by who we are with, but by who we are. She walked into that gala as a ghost of someone else's past, but she walked out as the architect of her own future. Her victory wasn't in John's humiliation, but in her own quiet, unshakable self-worth, a value that was finally recognized by someone who could see the masterpiece underneath the grime. What did you think of Nancy's incredible transformation? Have you ever had a moment where you realized your own strength after being underestimated? Let us know in the comments below. If her story of resilience and empowerment inspired you, please hit that like button, share this video, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories of triumph.